I always do that. Okay, thank you for everybody that has come. I think I've let everybody in that wants to come in. If not, my student Sarah is here, and she's going to be my co-host, and she'll let people in as they come in. So thank you for all my formers being here. You are awesome. So if you don't know me, my name is Starlynn Nance, and I'm originally from Oklahoma, and I graduated from OU with 2 degrees and with my bachelor's at UCO. And I'm now a professor at the University of Central Missouri, and I'm the director of the social studies program. And I got interested in Hollywood or history through a call out, and I've been published in this book. And I highly recommend that you guys at least just look it up on Google Books, and you can look inside of it. This is the world history, and they already have a US history. And then there's some other books coming out. So what is Hollywood or history? Well, Dr. Scott Roberts, he actually lives in Canada, but he works in Michigan. And he invented this inquiry, and he used it in his middle school classroom with the Civil War. And he and a colleague of his named Dr. Charles Elfer got together and started editing Hollywood or history books. And it's an inquiry framework where the students have to figure out if these historical films are accurate or they not accurate. And then I have mimicked I talked to him about this presentation, and I've mimicked everything. He did want me to let you know that actually becomes a series. I think it was supposed to be 1 book, and then it turned into 2, and now it's turned into a series. My book and Sarah's book will be coming out very, very soon. Her book is about inequality, and then my book is about issue-centered with a C3 framework from MCSS. And I've also heard there's a Bart Simpson book coming out, but I can't confirm or deny that at the moment, but I think that's very fun. And a lot of other text coming out that is very appropriate for any history class coming in. I think Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Okay, so I do have to brag for just a second. She's actually on here with us. My former student, Taylor, actually has a book in Sarah's, a chapter in Sarah's book called Taking a Ride with Moses. And it's the movie Harriet. And so I just wanted to let you know, Taylor is a part of this too. She drank the Kool-Aid and started doing this in her class. I called her one day and said, hey, I have some for you. And she did it, and it was a success. And so she actually will be published now. So Hollywood history is an inquiry. It's where the teacher takes a step back and allows the kids to find out the answer on their own. And it's very much easy to do once you actually have the clips down and all these things. And like, these books have done all the work for the teacher. The lesson plans are in the chapters. And so everything is pretty much right there with the books, but you can make your own. You don't have to go out and buy the book. If you want to look on Google Books and just check out kind of the format, you can look at those. But mine particularly has to do with sitcoms. So that's why mine's a little different. The other 2 have to do with movies. And what you do is you take your primary sources and your background information, which is your content of your class, and you ask the question, is this Hollywood or history, or somewhere in the middle? And so once you do that, then the students have to look at the primary sources, and they have to say, yes, it's Hollywood. No, it's not Hollywood. It's actually history. The producers and the directors did a good job. The actors portrayed this well. And they actually write essays about if this is, yes, this is accurate, or this is no. Now, we all know it depends on what movie that you watch. Some work with historians, some don't. You know, and so it's up to the kids to find it out. The tricky part is the primary sources. That's the tricky part. Using the Hollywood or history with sitcoms, however, I married the C3 framework, which is from National Council for the Social Studies. And we go through all 4 of the dimensions. And so I also use James A. Banks's multicultural approaches and culture responsive teaching. I did not say that in my book, but I did use it. And so if your school district is wanting to know how to use culture responsive teaching. I've actually implemented that in my lesson plans. And so that's already done for the teacher also. But with sitcoms, you're talking about real world social issues. So there are some sitcoms that I used in my book. And the first one that we're going to talk about is Dairy Girls. And if you haven't watched it, it's on Netflix and it's an Irish television show. And it's the Troubles in the 90s. So the first thing that you're going to do is you watch the sitcom and you think, because I know we've all done this. We're sitting there watching, and you're like, I can use this in class. So now that we have YouTube and all those things like that, you can find clips talking about, or in my book, you watch the whole sitcom or 2 sitcoms because they're only between 22 and 24 minutes long, so you have time. And for the first thing you do is define, and then dimension 1 is you have the hook and the compelling question. And I follow NCSS pretty closely, but some of this stuff I kind of like do my little twist to it. And my hooks are usually crazy and out on left field, and my compelling questions usually don't make a whole lot of sense to the kids. And I think that gets their attention. And then you ask the kids once they watch the sitcom, is this true? Is this Hollywood or is this history? Because everything has a history to it. And so you're going to take the content, which is in Dimension 2, and I wrote Oklahoma Social Studies curriculum or your district curriculum. And Lyndall's coming. And you take that curriculum, whoever gives it to you, or you get to make your own, and you're going to teach that curriculum. So NCSS doesn't throw out the curricular content. They just you engage with it. So how I teach my methods class, the C3, is you have Dimension 1, Dimension 2, Dimension 2.2, and then Dimension 3 and Dimension 4. And basically, if you look at any unit that you already have, you do these 4 things, but you might not do them in this order. And so you do your curricular content next. So if you're doing Hollywood or history, then you're going to add the videos, the clips, or the whole movie, or whatever you want to do. Hollywood or history is usually video clips from YouTube that are free. Rarely does a Hollywood or history person watch the entire movie. They just look at the clips and the primary sources that match them, that talk to them. So if you're going to use a movie like Batman, Taylor used Batman and the French Revolution. And so when she did that, she did do the whole movie. So, but that's rare. However, the sitcoms are shorter, so you can use those. Then you evaluate primary sources. And then in Dimension 4, this is where my twist comes in. Most teachers know what IDM is. IDM is Dr. Swan, Dr. Lee, Dr. Grant, and they have their own website, and it's C3 Teachers, and they give you wonderful lesson plans. But their Dimension 4 is told to the students. You're going to write a letter or whatever. My Dimension 4 is you follow what the student's plan is and who their stakeholders are, what's important to them. So you're really not writing a lesson plan. You just let them go. And so this is kind of how you set your unit up. And so don't throw out your units. You just stick them in, the curricular content in Dimension 2, and you teach the vocabulary and you do your activities and simulations and whatever else. We're just going to add those video clips to that also. And then they're going to connect while they're doing their primary sources in Dimension 3. So I've given you some examples from one that I've written. And Dimension 1, this is the Dairy Girls. Like I said, it's Irish. And my friend told me you need to watch the Dairy Girls, and I thought it was DAIRY girls, like milk and cows. I felt really stupid when I looked it up, and it was Catholic school girls in Ireland in the Troubles. And I have told real Irish people that, and they laughed at me. From Derry, they laughed at me. And so the Hollywood or history Dairy Girls, that's the first compelling question. So are these episodes I'm showing you, are they about the Troubles? Does it show the Troubles, or is it just Hollywood? And that's my first compelling question. My second compelling question is, do zombies repeat history? And my third compelling question is, does an agreement end a conflict? And so through these dimensions, the kids are going to answer these questions. And so I start with, do zombies repeat history? And if you're old enough, okay, or your parents were really cool, one or the other, you're going to know the Cranberries. And so when the kids come in, the first thing we're going to do is watch the video Zombie by the Cranberries. And then I'm going to have them do an analysis sheet. And that analysis sheet is going to ask questions like, what is the title? What do you think you see? And I'm not going to tell them anything. So, it's in black and white. What's going on in the video? Then they're going to analyze the words to zombie. Then we're going to start using history. What did it mean when she said this date? Who is she? Who is Dolores O'Riordan? Who are the Cranberries? Where are they from? And so the teacher is asking all of these questions. We're filling out this analysis sheet, and they have to do the research to find out what is going on in this song. And they're going to quickly find out that it was written in the 90s. It's actually a song that talks about against the government, against Great Britain. They're going to find out that the Cranberries are actually, she's from Limerick. So they don't live in Northern Ireland. They're going to find out real fast there's two parts of Ireland. And so the kids are they're going to have to look at a map. And so the teacher is just guiding them through this. And when they start looking at the words to zombie, they're going to start looking at history. Because she makes some very important dates. She states some very important things about moms crying. And so it's talking about a bombing that happened that killed two 11-year-old boys. And so they're going to find that out. And then they're going to find out that Ireland is two parts. And then they're going to find out Northern Ireland is stuck to Great Britain. And so they're going to find out all these things. And this is like, it's okay if they find out things that are not in order. You're there to clarify that historical event after they figure out what she's talking about in the song. The video, the way they look at the video first is because I want them to see Belfast, because she actually filmed it in Belfast. And so I want them to know the difference between Belfast, that's the capital, versus Derry and Derry Girls. So, they're going to start doing geography and those kinds of things. And so this is basically just a discovery part. And then they have to write, I use the PEEL, the PEEL paragraphs. I use that as the literacy component. You can use whatever your school uses, or, get with your English teacher and ask what kind of, format that they use, and they can double dip in that. But we use the PEEL in my program. And they have to use primary sources, use evidence, and they have to explain that evidence. So their primary source is the video, their analysis sheet, and then the words to the song, and then the history of what they found behind it. And then they're going to answer the question, do zombies repeat history? Well, in the song, they have to figure out what zombie represents. So it's a metaphor. Is it a metaphor for the IRA, or is it a metaphor for Great Britain and the army that controls Belfast and Derry? The Brits is what they call them. And so it's all this discovery that they're doing. So that's dimension one. So I used music. You can use a picture. You can use a quote. You can use anything you want. We made one last year with one of my students. It was a first year teacher, and she was having a hard time with, she was a very small school, with materials during COVID, and going back and forth from online to in person, and everybody getting sick and those things. And so we just used her textbook, and we did it over the Cold War. So I'm going to answer Baker Vets. Can you say the video clip again? It's the Zombies by the Cranberries. Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Heather. And if you just type in Zombies Cranberries, the video will pop up. But it is in Belfast because I did the homework for you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to do things. So they have, once they get the metaphor down, they can say, oh, okay, the zombies represent this, and I have all this data to back it up, and then they do the PEEL. So I feel like, as a baby historian, which is what we do in my classes, I feel like the question should be, the compelling question should not have a right answer. I think they should be able to be backed up by evidence. Because if you read historians, they don't always agree on the same thing. And so their lenses sometimes are different also, depending on, if they're another type of a part in the social studies, like a economist or anything like that. They always talk about the same event differently. So I think that they need to understand that people can see things differently. And so they can, if they think the zombies are a Brit, they'll say something different. If they think the zombies are the IRA, then they'll talk about it differently. So the analysis sheet are archives.org. I'm sure you guys have seen this. They have a list. They're absolutely fabulous, and I highly recommend using them. We use the analysis sheet for the video, for the MTV video of the Cranberries, and then we use the analysis sheet for the written part of the song. So 2 different ones. They're nice, they're simple, they have great questions, and so you can just have your whole lesson plan, just what you guys are talking about back and forth, because they're gathering data as you're talking about things. So dimension 2 is the content. So my content would be Irish history. So let's say before COVID, Taylor was actually going to do this in her classroom. She's a world history teacher, but then we didn't get to do it. So, but she was going to teach Irish history. We were going to go way back, and then we were going to go forward with it. And they were going to do the Dairy Girls at the beginning. I will warn you right now, and I did write this in my book, Dairy Girls has very strong language. And so if you're going to show this, you need permission slips because they are Irish. So they have very strong, and you can talk like that on their TV shows. So just make sure, you use clips or cut clips or things like that. So I am warning you up front. But it's about sectarianism. And in my experience of teaching, I never taught sectarianism, shame on me, but we never really got there. And so when I started actually learning about Irish history and the background because of Dairy Girls, I thought this needs to be in my book because people need to learn about sectarianism, because the Irish and the Protestants are not the only type of sectarianism there is. And so you can go, all over the world. There's a couple different in Africa and in the Middle East, we can talk about sectarianism. And then we talk about Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And then we start connecting the song to the content. And so this would be the content that I would teach. I didn't look up the Oklahoma standards if there were an Irish history component, but I'm sure if you talked about Great Britain and imperialism, you could talk about this, and colonialism, you could talk about this, and then have this as a side if you wanted to do that as a world history teacher for high school. Here's the graphic organizer for the Hollywood or history. So when the students are watching the video and they're looking up things about what the song means, they're writing their primary sources down on the left-hand side. And in any of the Hollywood or history books, they actually have this nice little graphic organizer for you. I don't know if you can see it, but you can make it yourself. But this is what it looks like, and it's primary sources, evidence from the episode, and then secondary sources, which is dimension 2. And so they're making this graphic organizer or a note sheet, or however you decide to do this, but they're putting their evidence down to write their peel or to write their 5-paragraph essay. Oh, whoops. Dimension 3 are primary sources, and this is the hardest part for teachers, in my opinion, for a C3, is to find primary sources that are balanced. And I am going to tell you that the Library of Congress, SHEG, the National Archives, and teachingamericanhistory.org and the IDM sites are the best ones that I've found. If you're going to do it's probably best if you have 5 or more balanced primary sources. And so these are the places I go first. And I have been very lucky that I have found teachers have put different sources together in these different sites. And so then I already have them and then can use them for my C3 how I need to. So I would highly recommend going to these sites to find your primary sources. And then more than 5 is good. And the students just source them. I teach my students how to do the SHEG, and they source, contextualize, they have to corroborate, they have to close read and annotate. And those are the things that I have them in my literacy class teach their students first. And so you could do that as a skills segment in the C3, or you can do it before you start a C3. And the kids will already know how to do those skills. And so they will take that skill set and they'll do that in these primary sources in Dimension 3. So what my students are going to do, well, I say my students, they're really not, but if I were a teacher, my students would do the Derry Girls, and my primary sources are going to come from Ireland. So the museums in Ireland, the museums in Derry, the museums in Belfast, and the British Museum. That's where I'm getting my primary sources from, because and then a document that actually was written 3 years ago that a professor did some research about, is sectarianism still around? Do we still not like each other, kind of thing? And the students are going to analyze that. And that's the primary sources for Derry Girls. And the kids will just click on the link and they'll read it, and then they'll put it on in their graphic organizer. Secondary sources are your curricular content. And then obviously they're going to write the type of essay you want them to, or the pill, which I like. The kids do well, even middle school kids do well with the pill. They get annoyed at it, I think, but they like it. So then I wrote real big for you, write that pill. So after D3, the kids have already written the zombie compelling question, and now they're going to do the Hollywood or history question at this time. And so they're going to answer the question, is the Derry Girls Hollywood, or is the Derry Girls history, or is the Derry Girls a mix? And so they get to decide their answer, and then they use all their evidence on, their 3 columns, and then they put the evidence in the peel. So Dimension 4 is all student-centered. I do live vote with my students. Unfortunately, they had to do it online. They did not like that. They do like it when it's not online. But the live vote one I stole from NCSS, but it's very student-centered. And I simply ask this question to transition to D4, and I tell my students to ask this question when they have to do this in student teaching for a C3. Do you see anything that is similar to what we've been learning in your community? That is the transition from your peel paragraph of Hollywood or history to the next compelling question, which was, does conflict, or does an agreement always end conflict? And so this is where they're going to come up with their own answer to that. And so in Dimension 4, I'm going to ask them, what have we learned about the Derry Girls? What have we learned about Ireland? What have we learned about Northern Ireland? What have we learned about the IRA? These are things that they've done the research, and they're going to just spill right back at me that we've already done in class. And I'm going to go, knowing what you know about sectarianism, do we have sectarianism in our community? And so I know some of the kids have said, yes, we have it. And they start throwing out different religions. And I'm like, that's not sectarianism. What is sectarianism? And we review it. And so, they'll say yes or no, or they sort of see it, or they've seen sort of it a little bit in the past, maybe when we first became a country, something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, if we don't have it like Northern Ireland, for example, then what do you see that's similar to that? And this is where the kids take control. And when I do it in my class, I just have a marker and I just start writing stuff on the board, and I have no opinion about anything. And that's why I wrote shh by teacher facilitated. It's very hard for me not to get involved because I have ideas and I think it's fun to come up with these plans and stuff. But as a teacher, you need them to do the inquiry. And so this is where I deviate from the IDM. I think the kids need to finish the inquiry and answer the questions. And every class will have a different answer and a different plan. And so I say, okay, so we list everything out. And my next question to them, because I did this in a 7th grade class with a former student and a student teacher at the time. And my former student said, okay, we have all of this listed. What can we do as 7th graders? Because literally on the list was fly to China. Okay, and everything is equal, but we can't fly the class to China. So we simply ask them, what resources do we have? And then if we don't have the resources to do that, which one of these do we have to mark out? And so fly to China was off the list, you know. So a little reality hits them in the face when we ask the right questions. And then they picked 1 or 2 to create an action plan. And that action plan can be all kinds of different things. And you have to ask them, okay, who are the stakeholders in this action? And so the teacher literally just asks question after question after question after question. And even if the kids ask you a question, you ask them one right back, because inquiry is figuring things out or investigating. So they need to go investigate. And, you know, like, I can't find this. You say, well, how have we found it in the past? And so they go investigate and find out how to do things. And so it's very student-centered. And it was hard with the 7th graders at first because they weren't used to it, but then they just came alive. And they were doing their action plans, and they came up with all of these wonderful ideas. And then they had to mark them out, and then they came up with one, and the whole class voted on it. And you know, they knew who their stakeholders were, they knew how to get a hold of them, and they went forward with that. So you don't tell the students, like an IDM will tell the students what to do. We don't do that in my part of the C3, especially my book. And so you say, what are you going to do? Who are the stakeholders? Is this school policy? Can we leave these 4 walls? Because your principal may be like, okay. And so you're like, well, if we can only do it in these 4 walls, what can we do? And that's what we had to say to the 7th graders. We can't leave campus. We can't get out of school. We can't fly to China, you know, those kinds of things. And so what in these 4 walls can we do? And they start coming up with the limits that we have as, you know, minors, or the limits that we have because the principals say we can't do this, this, or this with school policies. And then they actually implement. And it's very important that they implement their plan. A lot of people just, we come up with a plan and then we go to the next unit. When they implement their plan, they feel very accomplished. The 7th graders were very accomplished. They were sharing it with their parents, and they're sharing it with their family members. Other teachers started getting involved because they were talking about it in the other classes and showing their, they had a class Twitter. They were allowed to have a class Twitter. And they were showing the class Twitter to their other teachers, and then those teachers started getting involved. And so the implementation went beyond the 4 walls, but in the school, and they were sharing it, and they were very proud of themselves for making they felt like they made this change, and they gave the community members some information like a PSA. And they did such a great job. They were doing economics at the college level. And so none of them ever were intimidated or anything by the economic topics that we brought up. And they just flowed right through it, and they loved it. And they didn't want to not, when it was over, they were sad. And so they liked it. And then I've seen it done in 9th grade classes. I've seen it done in 11th grade classes. And the implementation part really is fun for the teacher to watch with the kids. I know you have limits, you know you have limits, but let the kids have big ideas and then say, okay, with the resources we have, because I stand up in front of my college students and I go, and they'll have stuff listed all over the board. And I'll go, we have no money. And then things start getting marked off because, you know, we have no money. Social studies has no money to give. So what can we do with no money? And so then they come up with these ideas and then they do them. And every class has different ways of doing the why vote. sometimes they come up with different data depending on who they're going out and researching. So they use their data to make this action plan and implement it. So that's D4. So I was wondering if any of you have questions. Oh, I went fast through that. But what I like to do when I present is I like teachers to ask me questions. And if you have a unit, I can walk you through it and turn it into a C3. Or if you're like, I want to try that later, I just want to do Hollywood history, how do I do it with this topic? Or if there's a movie that you like, I can walk you through that. And so does anybody have any questions about Hollywood or history or C3 or my book or anything? It's like teaching high school again. Nope. Well, if you don't, I'm surprised Lyndall doesn't have a question. Please, Lyndall Cadell always has a question. I've known you too long, Lyndall. Taylor already knows how to do this, so. Well, my name is Starlynn Nance, and I'm from UCM, and my email is nance@ucm.edu. And if you want help with putting a Hollywood or history together, or you want help with the textbooks, I do highly recommend the American history and the world history, though. They're excellent. The people who have been published are high quality teachers and high quality professors that have been published in them. And even Pocahontas, I never thought about. It's a kindergarten, first grade, but it's excellent. It's the first one in the U.S. history text, but it's excellent. So I'm supposed to tell you to go to the chat box, and so that you can get your certificate, I think it is, from David, you need to fill out what's been put in the chat box. And I've been told that he will send it to you via email for your school district if you need one of those. If not, I'm done, but I'll stay on for like 10 minutes if anybody wants to ask questions. Sorry, I went so fast. I talk really fast. Oh, thanks, Lyndall. I think you would be on my side if I was super boring anyway. You're just nice to me. I worked with you a long time.
Dr. Nance, one of the classes for next semester that I'll be student teaching in is psychology of the Holocaust. Do you have any good movie recommendations for that? Because I think that might be a cool topic to do. Is this Hollywood or or history with it?
I think that Taylor, what's that movie? You know what I'm talking about. Yes. We can do that.
I was thinking Boy in the Striped Pajamas.
That's what I was. Yeah. I think
Okay.
that we could, and I think that what you would just need from your teacher is what content that because we don't have psychology in Oklahoma. They have standards. We don't have standards in psychology. So I think we should do that, and then that would be, we could put that together. That's not going to be a big deal.
Okay, yeah, because I was just thinking that might be a cool unit to do, like a Hollywood history.
Do you know, has she given you the content to that yet?
she has no idea. Like she's just every week is just like she doesn't lay her stuff out and in the it's week to week basis.
That's
And
fine.
I think next semester she's kind of like, yeah, you can do what you want with whatever. So, and that's like an elective class, so she doesn't have a strict standards to follow with it, if that makes sense.
I think we should look at APA and then, but yeah, I think what Taylor said would be excellent. And then what you can do is, depending on what your teacher wants to do, because you can always say that first. That's what I always say.
Yes.
But you actually can, if it's an elective and she's like, have at it, which I hope she says it, we probably can do the whole movie, because what Taylor and I did with Batman and the French Revolution was, okay, if anybody else is listening, we lie to the children, okay? And we tell, and Kate, I want Casey to do this, so maybe Casey will do this next semester with her kids. But they lie to the kids and they say, oh my God, you've been so good. We're going to watch a movie. Don't tell your parents. But you tell your principal that you're lying to the children, because there will be phone calls. And have them watch it first. And then Taylor came in and said, was this Hollywood or history? And they were like, what are you talking about? And so they were so into the movie that once she started doing the character analysis, then they were able to see who Batman was in the French Revolution, who, oh gosh, Taylor, help me out with some of the what was the girl's name in the movie? You know, I don't like this
There's like Catwoman, and then like how Bane is, Robespierre and stuff.
Yeah. And so when she started doing the character analysis, the kids were able to connect what they saw. And then they're like, oh yeah, that happened. Oh yeah, they were at the football field. Oh yeah, and so they were able to mass execution, those kinds of things. And she was able to connect that, and it just blew their minds that they had just learned the French Revolution from Batman. And so what we can do is something similar to that, if that's what you want to do, or we can cut it up and they can look at what happens. And then I'm curious about her psychology, that side of it, that I'm curious about what she wants to attach to that. Now, if she says it's a free-for-all, I can help you.
Yeah,
but
so
we get her stuff first and then roll with it.
Okay, yeah, it sounds good. I mean, it is just an elective class, and this semester was psychology alone, just psychology. And then next year, she's doing psychology of the Holocaust. And I think specifically because we talked about like doing, the whole just concept of, grouping and the rabbit experience and people's, how they respond to trauma, their brain, and all that kind of stuff. But she's pretty open to doing whatever. It's the first time she's teaching the class, so she's totally open to whatever we want to do.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to find some background information. And so like when you set this up, because it sounds like she's going to be real easy to get along with. And so we can go from dimension 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I think that if she will look at the psychology class that she's teaching now and what she wants to reteach with the students, we can do, because she'll want to, I don't say repeat, but she wants to reteach those things, so that they're getting on video, they're seeing it happen.
Yeah, seeing what you learn about,
and then concept. They connect. Yeah, and so and we had the compelling question. So we would ask, we'll come up with something that's really strange, like I always do, and then we'll go from there, like the zombies. So, because all of mine are weird. Like they don't have to be weird. I enjoy.
Because I think it gets them more involved, more like where are we going with this? How am I supposed to answer this?
Well, it gets their attention. And that's even if they say this is stupid, it has nothing to do with history, you got their attention. And so, they'll still kind of want to know what's going on. But yeah, I think that anybody that, and especially, for student teaching, take what we have. So we'll take what your teacher has and we'll build on it, because you never want to throw your stuff out ever, 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 unless you're just sick of it and you just want to start new. But you all, in that dimension too is that curricular content, and we use the contextual stuff too. But like I just think of it in steps, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and that really does help me put it together with what I already have, because that was the first time Taylor had taught world history, but she already had some stuff together when I come up with these crazy things and call her. And that's what I do to her all the time. That's why she's published. And I make her go to Austin and present with me, because she says, okay, she hasn't turned me down yet. Sarah's like, poor Taylor.
No, not at all.
The food was just so bad in Austin, and all the free things. It was rough.
Yeah, her life in Austin was very rough when we presented at NCSS together. But those kinds of things, don't ever throw anything out. I mean, you take what you have and then develop it through the 4 different steps. Mm-hmm. I think the funnest step is step 1 for me, and then the last one, watching the kids go through, and you'll enjoy this, watching them go through and being able to implement something. So if you're looking at a movie that in psychology, I mean, that's going to be some heavy stuff for them. And so we'll need to talk about what really debriefing is. And we'll need to talk about trauma with kids and historical trauma that kids have to go through. And we're going to have a major conversation about how you start this and how you finish it. And, your teacher has to be on board, because you are a student teacher, and I don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable. So that's why I want to know what her limits are before we start picking movies. Because if she's up to the challenge and she wants to see it, we can limit. The clips are easier because you're limiting some of the things they won't see. Does that make sense? But it still fits in with, dimension 3, which is the primary sources. But anytime you talk about the Holocaust, it's traumatic and it's sad and it's real. And so putting that in a C3 where it's a framework, I think teachers will feel more secure because they decide what clips to use. You know what I'm saying? But we will have to do a major debriefing. We'll have to, she'll have to be on board with all of those things. But we might just talk about clips at first. And when you become a real teacher, we can go from there. So.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Everybody else was like, oh, is this a one-on-one time with Sarah? People be watching on the video like, this woman's a nut. Taylor, do you want to share anything since you've done this before? Since Casey's here and she's going to do French Revolution?
I mean, I think when I did it, I had like a worksheet. So like if anyone comes in, it looks like we're doing it. So make sure we're filling it out. And it was like a character analysis. So Batman, what are his traits? Like, where is he in the movie? Like, so they had at least like a thought tracker. So at the end of the 4 days it took to watch the like 2-hour movie, then they could refer to that. And then I was like, oh, by the way, you learned the revolution. And they're like, no, we didn't. And then we did little PowerPoint comparing and like, oh, he's actually this person, or oh, this is how it worked. And then they, I think, had a theme tracker too. So like they had to track the themes they were seeing in the movie on their own anyway. And then that kind of helped to connect it to like revolution, protesting, those types of things. So that's always good too. Just like an easy graphic organizer, because they hate answering questions while they're watching movies. But I just phrased it as like, oh.
Casey, are you interested in doing this? She's not going to talk to me today. She had to see me yesterday.
Okay, sorry. I was like, am I doing this right? Yeah, that one, or the Dairy Girls one. Like, I really like the idea of, you could really tie that into imperialism. Like for my like unit of that, just like do a little side note. Hey, look, let's do some Irish history, because I feel like that always gets left out, you know? The options are limited for world histories.
Yeah. And I actually have talked to people who've gone through the Troubles. They're like 10 years older than me. and they lived the Troubles in Derry. And I actually got to talk to them on a video conference. And it's interesting I listened to their podcast. And so I told them I wrote this chapter and they wanted to talk to me. So I talked to them about it, and they know the writer of the show. She's from Derry, and they've told her. And so it's just, it's so interesting. And I did not realize how horrible it was. And I read history out of order, just depends on what mood I'm in. But I went back to even the Vikings that were, and let me just let you know that Mr. Cadell has a photographic memory and knows way more than I do. So Lyndall, anytime you want to pop in, please do. But I went back to the Vikings and how, I mean, even Ireland was attacked from day one. Am I right, Lyndall? Okay, like, bless their hearts, they've never been left alone, ever. And then the Scots went over, and then and so they just have this very traumatic history. And so when you because what is your essential question, Casey, to imperialism? This is great, by the way. I didn't have anything to do with this. It's all Casey.
How is Great Britain during new imperialism like the Ted Bundy of serial killers?
Yeah.
So
and
they have to
no,
we go in and do like a psychoanalysis of like Great Britain, and then talk about like how they're, because like, you know, serial killer, they all have their usual MO, but then we talk about Ted Bundy, not in like extreme depth or anything, like
right.
graphic images or stuff like that. We're not like glorifying it, but then they use those characteristics and similarities of like manipulation and like that kind of tactic, and they look at Great Britain with like India in specific.
Yeah, and that's why she has my student teacher. But yeah, like anything that, like, Casey, I walked in her class one day to say hi. And she had that on her board, and I go, I'm sorry, you can explain this to me, because I am like, this is the best essential question I've ever seen in my life. And I make up good ones, but this is the best one. And she started talking to me about it, and the kids get into it, don't they, Casey? I mean, they get into manipulation.
Anytime they think that they're not like learning and they're just talking about like pop culture, it's way more engaging for them. They just, the ideas are endless, and then you're like, hey, you guys just learned something.
Yeah, and that's why these compelling questions / essential questions, same word. So that's why they're the weirder they are, in my opinion. They don't have to be, but the weirder they are, in my opinion, the more that they, you know, metaphors are really good to use. Casey, didn't you use metaphors and stuff? Like, you've used that in the past, and irony and those kinds of things. She's used those in her essential questions, and they've, you know, this is like this, and this is like, how is this like this? And they, you know, they don't fit, you know, until you start thinking it through, and then metaphors and those kinds of things. Mr. Cadell says, I'm thinking of films that I used, including April Morning on American Revolution. That's good. I Am David on Refugee and Stalinist Eastern. I've never seen that. Excellent. I'm writing all this down. Eastern Europe, is it Langan on British colonialism? In India, oh, that's good. And I used Geography, Juma from South Africa. Those are good. Thank you, Lyndall. I haven't seen some of those. Hollywood or history is one of the best things that I've ever come across. And Dr. Scott Roberts is the nicest guy, and he puts up with me and all of my millions of questions for Hollywood or history. It's worked in Taylor's class. I think, Casey, if you wanted to do Dairy Girls, we'll have to cut it, because you need to. Have you watched it? Has anybody ever seen Dairy Girls other than myself? Oh, it's not kid friendly. So
I was gonna ask,
someone
like, how many
I know likes Downton Abbey.
yes,
There's some good clips about Ireland in
oh,
Downton Abbey, and
you're
about
right.
the treatment and the Irish Revolutionary that
Yes.
might really connect there.
Yes, and Downton Abbey is very G, so that's a great idea.
And there's that new movie Belfast is coming out, and it's about that. Like
Yeah,
that.
and that was recommended to me by
I was gonna text you that when I saw the preview the other day. I was
Yeah.
like, this looks
I'll be
appealing.
watching that. Yeah. So, but I think the students get into this. I think that, and Taylor has done this with 10th graders. So she definitely, I mean, Taylor and I and Jordan have done it with 7th graders. So, you know, C3 and HOH, she's, bless her heart. She just, I make her do everything, bless her heart. We feel sorry for Taylor. But you can ask her questions if you want to about how the kids took it, but they were shocked at because I always say, text me what they think, text me what they say, because I couldn't go in and watch. Her district's too big for me just to go in. Jordan, different story. It was down the street for me. I would just go watch, but they were pretty surprised, weren't they, when they figured it out? And then they connected better.
They even kept referencing it by the end of the semester during their final. They'd be like, no, remember Bane was the guy, and they're like debating it with each other. So like that was just how they categorized it in their brain, was they kept it as the characters of the show and related them back and forth. So
yeah, I really like the inquiry. I mean, I think this is one of the better things, and I'm not a writer, so at all, but I just felt like using issued centered with the sitcoms was just excellent. And like Casey says, we can use it in world history, or one of the sitcoms I use is a Hispanic school in LA, and we talk about bullying and we talk about discrimination, and specifically in that show, in that episode, it's okay to discriminate against the boy students because they're boys, but it's not okay to discriminate against the girl students. And so you can see how it wasn't equal. And so we talk about discrimination in that. Every sitcom that I used, except for one, are minority sitcoms. And so you have your culturally responsive teaching inside of that. And so, but they're funny. I asked my editor, Dr. Roberts, I said, which one did you like? And he said, Ireland. That was the first one. And he said, and your last chapter on voting, because I compare Blackish and I compare Last Man Standing, because both of them have a voting episode, and you compare Black family that's, you know, upper middle class, doctor, lawyer, you know, they're all, versus same thing, Last Man Standing, upper middle class white area in Colorado. You compare those two in those episodes, and he was like, I really liked that. And you can tell the difference, the dialogue, the way they talk to each other. You know, in Last Man Standing, one of the little girls, she's 18, and she's like, I just won't vote, it doesn't matter. Versus the Blackish are like, we gotta vote, you know, we can't find my name, they won't let me register, like it was a struggle, versus I'm just not gonna vote. And so you can see the differences in the sitcom. And so they're two different years, and so they're two different presidential elections, but that didn't matter. It was about what they were talking about and how important voting is. And so he liked that one. I have gender bias. I have one of my favorite, well, another one is a Will and Grace episode about the Colorado bakery. So my essential question is, or my compelling question is, can you have your cake and exercise too? Because it's over the First Amendment exercise clause. And so that's my essential question for that. And it's just I think for the teacher side of it, I like doing this. I would do this for money. If people would be like, you write all my lesson plans and I'll pay you, I'd be like, okay. Because that's why I call Taylor, bless her heart, is because I'm like, will you do this lesson plan and tell me how it works? And I'm just Dairy Girls honestly I wrote it before the book even came about because I wanted Taylor to do it in her class. And so, you know, she had 10th graders and it was just going to be fun. But yeah, but sitcoms I think are great. Sarah, we might we might do some sitcoms in your psychology class and lighten it up a little bit also. And we'll have to find some topics, but a lot of the sitcoms talk about the Holocaust, or we can do a comparison. There's a Cosby show about MLK. I know, have you ever seen the Cosby Show? You're very young. But there's one about the MLK, and it's very moving. But Blackish is probably one of the best shows out there. Okay.
So, yeah.
And we can use Blackish and talk about, I know they've had probably an MLK, but we can talk about, you never want to compare the Holocaust to anything or any other people's. Like you never want to do that ever. But, some of the psychology is the same. And since that's our lens, we can use that lens. We're not comparing, we're just showing that type of psychology is the same nowadays. Does that make sense?
Yeah, not comparing the events, just the psychology of a group of people.
Yeah. Alyssa, do you have anything? She said she would come if she didn't have to show her face. That's what she said to me.
No, I'm good. I'm just thinking because we're starting Westward Expansion tomorrow. That's our upcoming unit.
Okay.
And then we have I think a mini reform unit, although we're in the middle of possibly revamping our curriculum. So I'm not sure exactly what direction we'll be going in, which could determine a lot of like what I could do maybe in the future.
I think you need to talk to Taylor, because the one that Taylor's about to be published in, you are going to really like. And it fits your curriculum perfect about Harriet. Oh. Is Taylor still here? I think we ran off all the Oklahoma people off except for Lyndall. He's not scared of us.
No. One question I have, so many of the sitcoms I'm familiar with are from a decade or 2 or 3 ago. Have you found a problem with students responding to older sitcoms?
No, because I don't think they would. And I'm telling you, you remember the Jeffersons?
Mm-hmm.
I want to use the Jeffersons. I didn't put it in, but I want to use the Jeffersons, and I want to compare it to Blackish and compare it because again, you can do this in psychology. It's the same, and what they're talking about is the same. And so I think, like anything, when we would show an old, when Taylor's young and Sarah's young, Alyssa's young, Casey's young, when you show anything that's old, they make fun of their clothes and, those kinds of things that the kids usually do. But once they start getting into the sitcom and listening to what they're saying, they don't really, have a problem. I think it's best to use ones in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, to be honest. And even Happy Days. I mean, and to see, just the privilege and how people were viewed, in that, because that was, what, 80s, early 80s. And so, but I mean, I know Bill Cosby has issues, but the Cosby Show is very progressive for its time. And so I like the Cosby Show, but no, I think the kids make fun of the clothes and those kind of things. But once they get past that, I mean, they start seeing similarities.
I was thinking for psychology that the Friends would probably have some episodes that would really work.
Yep. That's a good idea too. Yeah. Sarah's writing it down.
Yeah. That I love the show Friends. So I'm trying to think of some episodes I can use that. And I know a lot of the kids have seen that as well. I was trying to think of The Office too. Might have a couple.
I think if you can, the other reason I wanted to use sitcoms with issued centered curriculum is because it's funny, and when people laugh, they're in better moods. And so I think it's easier to talk if you're not tensed up from a movie, because if you watch Dunkirk or anything like that, you're in that. And so you don't really can talk about it, but you can talk about these issue-centered things because the comedy behind it makes it easier. And so that's another reason why I chose the sitcoms that I did too, is they're just funny and they're real issues today.
One of my responses is I'm really thinking that you're using, in a way, analogies when you're comparing this to that. And that's really higher order thinking skills.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of it that way. I think following the C3 has really helped me. I didn't have it when I was a teacher. But I think following that framework, even if it's just loosely following it, I think it helps the teacher because most of the time you have to facilitate and shut your mouth, which is very hard for obviously me because I'm still talking. And, for every other teacher that I've ever met. But it makes the kids do the work. And I think that that's why I like the C3 so much, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I do this in here and I do this here, and then I shut up here and I shut up here, And so it just gives me a mindset to go through. That's why I like it a lot. Taylor uses it too. I made Taylor do it last year.
Sometimes
we even did the one in government too with designated survivor, and we did like the chain of succession and like what that actually happened, like what are the odds if we actually had this go down? Would it really be the guy that got fired that morning? And they really liked that one too. And some kids even finished the show. Like they were like, oh, we only watched parts of the pilot, and they were like, I want to see what happens next. And they
she did that one. And okay, it's my time. She did that one. Sarah, we could actually do that. Taylor can share that with you, and you can do that in your class next semester in one of your classes. And so I know that Alyssa's US 8th grade, Casey is 10th grade world, Taylor is 8th grade US, and then Sarah, you've got 2 classes, right, next semester?
I have a bunch. So this is rural school. So she has US history through films, which obviously that'd be perfect to do any of these Hollywood or history. And then I have psychology through the Holocaust, and then government, and then she has a personal finance class. So she's really spread out.
Your class was government when you did the designated, was it the 9th grade class you had? Yeah, hers was government, so we can borrow that from Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a good, I like C3. I like, I think I like having conversation. Obviously I know all of you, but we've run all the Oklahomans off, but I like having conversation with teachers, because then they start going, oh, I've already got that. Oh, I've got that, and then with Sarah, she's was in my methods class. So she's about to student teach. And then she'll be a real teacher. Isn't that right, Sarah? And so everybody's been through my methods class except Lyndall. So they all go, oh, bless your heart. So they know. But once you get out, you can try these things in student teaching, because when you have a supportive teacher, like it sounds like we have, they actually like to steal your stuff and use it the next year. So, you get to do all the work and they get to benefit from it later. So when they have open minds like this, like we can do gamification. Taylor's first unit, her student teaching, gamification. She never done it in her life. Like, I'm mean to her. You saw how mean I am to her. And she used it this year though, didn't you, Taylor, to teach skill sets? You used part of the gamification. So, all of these things that we've learned in methods, she actually did and then if I come up with something new, I call her as a teacher and say, hey, I have an idea. What do you think about it? And then we brainstorm it. We just came up with Histoween. And she did that, and it was the Salem Witch Trials, and we did a C3 with the Salem Witch Trials, and we called it Histoween. And the kids thought it was great. They like Salem, the witches and learning how to do it. And so she did all 4 dimensions. And Taylor, because they're 8th grade, she connects it. Taylor, what did you do last year with when you couldn't put up the posters because the principal was scared? What was that one that you did?
Oh, that was the Andrew Jackson one with Indian removal. And we did like, we connected it to the modern like Syrian refugees and like how there's children crossing the continent themselves on foot. And they wanted to make posters to like raise awareness for like how many children are doing this by themselves that are like their age. So that's what because they connected Indian removal was like just kicking people out of their home because of a belief that they had or a difference that they had to like the modern refugee crisis and how they're just leaving to try and go somewhere because they're different and that type of thing.
And their posters, she sent me a picture of a couple of them, and they were high quality PSAs. That's what the kids wanted to do. And then they were allowed to post them in one corner, just because they didn't want to offend anybody. But it was they weren't offensive. They were a true PSA, and they gave
they were very informational with statistics
it was evidence. They had their bibliography at the bottom, and it was just very professionally done, because Taylor's not going to allow them to do anything that's not going to be able to be put on a wall. But it was COVID and everybody was on high alert anyway. So, but they did get to put it up in one of the halls. And so they did get to do the implementation part, and they were proud of it. And didn't they make their friends go by and look at them? Taylor, one of the little girls in your
I hung them up around the school, and they'd be like, "This is mine," and they'd like smack the wall, and they'd like show their friends. Or she put because each class I said I'd pick like the top 2 or 3, so there was like 15 or 16 around the school, and so they would get excited, like, "Who did you pick? Are you going to show us who you picked? Like, which one was the best one?" And then they would get all excited about it.
But they learned better about real life, because they didn't know much about that, did they, Taylor? Once you started, they started connecting it. And so, Sarah, we'll do it slow and baby time, because we never ever want to upset a teacher. And Casey's one of my teachers now, and so she's like, whatever, but I always say, "Are you okay with this?" And she'll roll her eyes at me and say yes, because she has one of my kids. But it's just they're in charge, and we don't want to upset anyone in Adrian, Missouri. And so, that's why we have to be careful because of where it's located also. And so we'll always go back. So I'll send you Oklahoma. Well, I think I already did send you Oklahoma's standards. Let's look through those psychology standards, because they're based on APA. I know they are. And
Okay.
and we'll use those as something we can show her and go, "This is another state standards. And so are these okay with you? Is this something that you like in your class that we can pull from?" But yeah, are you going to see her anytime soon? You might start talking to her about it, because we'll want to have this done by the first day of school. And I know your schedule is hectic right now, but we can set up some time during Christmas break and walk through this with you. And so we can hand it to her, and she can go, "I don't like that, change that. I don't like that," and we can change it and make her feel comfortable, because we never want to make anybody mad. You can make people mad when you're a real teacher. It's really easy to do. You can do that later. Oh gosh, that's on a recording. Please take that out. I'm not from Oklahoma. I work in Missouri. We upset Missouri teachers.
I think one of the hardest things is just how much time to allow for different topics, and especially, using films and so on. Even, with 45 years, there's always the time issue that gave me the most trouble.
I think that's what I'm struggling with too, is because I asked her, I'm like, "Do you guys have a curriculum? Do you have a textbook?" They don't even get a textbook. She literally has free reign to do whatever she wants to do, which is great. But it's also like, there's so much you can cover. And yeah, you have your Missouri learning standards, but there's nothing else to go on. So it's just this free range. And, I feel like I can go down a rabbit hole, because I just love history so much. You just get so obsessed with something when really you should be in more of a broader picture, if that makes sense.
We'll have to narrow some things down. Ask her about the movie. So when you see her, when you go to your 50 hours next. So Lyndall, just really quickly, I put my kids with the same teacher for 2 straight semesters. They are an observer first, and they do 6 lessons, and then they student teach with them. And I've been doing this for about 6 years, and it works out so well. Now, It's not 100% because sometimes they go back to St. Louis or they have a, cousin that works at blah, 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 and they go there. But most of the time when they stay, it's very successful. And so she'll be staying with her same teacher. That's why we keep switching semesters on you. And so right now she's doing her what we call the 50 hours. And so she had my methods class first, and then they go out and do their teaching part. And so, but we'll talk, and then we'll get the answers, and then we'll get her permission. But even if we have to change some things, you have it, and you can use it in American history. You can use it in psychology. You can use it in government. Like, there's so many different things you will already have it. And so it's not going to be wasted. So don't get upset.
I have loved hearing about all the things your students do. I do keep up with those posts and things.
Linda reads my Facebook when I make fun of the children. I mean, I never do that.
One other resource with the psychology of the Holocaust is, of course, there's the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Tulsa. I have been to, they